We are often asked for advice after somebody has done something when it is too late to change course. So today we're getting in early to stop you making a bad decision that cannot be undone. Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information. Today we're talking about getting advice at the right time, not waiting until it's too late.
But before we get into that, what's your special house this week, Meighan?
It's not one.
It's her office.
This is my house.
This is her office,
which
I have to say that is a lot neater than it used to be because she's only recently moved in there and it was still a bit of debris, but now it's looking more organised.
Been in this house.
Much more organised. All right, so for anyone watching the video, or anyone not watching the video, don't suddenly turn on the video to see. It's nothing.
There's nothing to see.
Nothing to see here. Okay. Now, you know what prompted us to record this episode?
What?
Both personally and in my business, my phone seems to be ringing off the hook lately with calls from people who are asking for advice after they've already gone down a path and got themselves stuck.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like setting off on a hike without a map. You know, it's daylight. Surely you can't get lost. And then all of a sudden, every tree looks like the last 20 you've walked past and you're not sure whether you're walking around in circles. Now is when you realise you needed a map, right? But at the beginning of the hike, it barely crossed your mind. Well,
that's sort of how it is for many people when they go to buy a property. So we're going to give you some examples of these calls. And believe me, I get them too. So you can get a sense of when it's too late to ask advice. We are giving it to you now.
So you don't make these same mistakes. It is a classic.
Yeah, and look, this one does come in a bit on a Monday. I was the highest bidder in auction, but I need a 3-month settlement and the contract says 42 days. How do I change it?
Now, solicitors and mortgage brokers and conveyancers all tell us that they hate Mondays because they get calls like this.
Yes. They do. They do. And look, we kind of laugh, but I think what this reveals to us, Veronica, is that people go into these enormous decisions without knowing what the actual process is. Now, in most states and in most situations, if you buy a property at an auction, that's the conditions that you are buying the property on. There's no saying afterwards.
No. Or you had to negotiate them before you bid. And you had to get clauses put in to cover what you need. But people just rock. I cannot believe the amount of people that just rock up and bid at auction. And
I think I've said this before. When I was a selling agent, so that maybe the second auction that I did, there was a guy riding his bike to get the milk and he stopped in, had a look and said, "Oh, can I have a look through?" And this was before you had to be registered to bid in Queensland, right? So you could not do this now. He walked through while the auction was happening. He came out and he said, "Oh, I like it." And he bid and he bought it. And he had to go home and tell his wife that he had just bought a house that he'd just seen that morning on the way to get milk.
I've got a similar story. When I was a selling agent, before it was the law in New South Wales, you had to register to bid at auction as well. And it was a Sunday auction, believe it or not. It was in December. So we had so many listings. We had to run Sunday auctions. That's giving you an idea about how.
Well, that's a buyer's market.
It was definitely a buyer's market. So much so, this particular property had tenants and they had a bulldog and they never cleaned up the bulldog's bullshit or the dog shit. It was disgusting. The house was absolutely disgusting. This guy wanders in walking his own dog. He'd gone for a walk
the property
with his own dog and then he buys it. And he was my only buyer. Like, if it wasn't for him, we were just going to have a nice little just walk in the park, humiliation in the lane, nobody bidding. But he bid. And then I was like, oh, my God, that's within QE. We'll be able to negotiate this thing. And we sold it to him. So there you go. So it does happen.
Unbelievable. Not suggesting this is a good strategy. Remember, we're here to tell you when it's too late to ask for advice.
Too late to ask for advice. And the thing where it happens, like these guys are both a bit cavalier, clearly. Obviously, first home buyers are usually a little bit more gun shy about doing things like that. But what does happen sometimes is that if you've missed out enough times, and you think, oh, my God, maybe I've got an opportunity, that is when somebody puts their hand up when they haven't done any of the due diligence. And that's when the next question that they then pose to an expert is too late. Right? Too late.
You can beg, you can get angry, you can do anything you want, but legally that seller hasn't got to agree to any changes that you might suggest. And often, just as a word of warning, but often a thing such as a settlement date is often structured around something else that is happening in that seller's life that isn't a movable date, relocating somewhere. Maybe they've bought a property that's settling. So your ability to influence after the fact when you've got no legal rights whatsoever is greatly reduced if the seller has some other imperatives that they need to meet by that date.
100%.
Too late. Learn it beforehand.
Here's another question I get asked a lot. And in my business, I'm not always asked this about the person. They don't ring me and say, I did this. It's usually my brother, my sister, my cousin, they did this.
Asking for a friend.
Can you help, right? And it goes something like this. I've made an offer, or my cousin, my sister, my whatever, made an offer. They got no answer from the vendor, so they increased it. Still no answer. I'm stumped. What do I do now?
There's something wrong with that negotiation strategy.
Yeah. And so
there's something missing there.
The two-way, there's lots missing. I think there's a lot missing in the lead up to making the offer.
Absolutely.
But there's also something critical missing. You can't have a negotiation if one side isn't responding, and it does happen. And so they're scratching their head. They don't know whether they offered too much, not enough, like whether they're really serious sellers. They just, because they've got no feedback and they've got no intel and they haven't done anything in the lead up to even work out whether they should make an offer, how much that offer should be, what the property is worth. They've often made all these assumptions around.
I reckon you could go around 30 or 35 questions that would need to be asked before you even understood where they were in that offer process.
And because I love wheeling sore teeth, I just have this curiosity to go, how did you arrive at that point? And, it's like I can't even help you probably because you probably dug yourself into this big hole. So quite often what buyers do, they make an offer that doesn't get the response that they want. So they make another offer. Then they go, well, I still don't have the response I want. They've got no information back. So they're shooting in the dark. They've got nothing to react to other than silence, right? So they keep digging this big hole for themselves until they're standing in this hole and all they've got above, they can just have their eyes above ground level. And they're going, have I dug the hole deep enough for myself yet?
Why aren't they responding? And then, that principle that we have, which is don't let the negotiation impact your decision to buy the property. It becomes about, well, they're not responding, therefore I'm just going to walk away. Well, what does it mean when you haven't heard anything back? Was that just like a text that you sent? Was it a message that you left with an agent that might have 40,000 messages that they haven't returned? What was the attempt at contact and what format was it in? Now, of course, we go into this in great depth in the course, Your First Home Buyer Guide. Won't go into it here, but these are the sorts of things that you shouldn't be doing, but the sorts of things you need to ask yourself. What is no response? Did you, was the number right? Did you send them the right email address? Did you?
Did you get
What
it?
does it mean?
Did you submit it in the format the agent wants? Do you know what format the agent wants the offer in? I mean, it's just so many things that go through we ask all these questions. Here's another one. I made an offer and I made it subject to finance and building and pest inspection. Why did the agent sell it to another buyer for less money?
Oh, well, it's happening at the moment. Actually, in our office, when we had our team meeting today, we were talking about the number of cash buyers that are out there. That's a really hard thing to, and I've just given away the answer to the question, by the way.
Oh, well, that's one answer. There's another answer, but you'll go with the cash buyer answer. Yeah.
And certainly in private treaty negotiations in jurisdictions where it's common to have conditions like these, being up against someone who has a cash offer, that is, they don't want any conditions. They don't need finance approval. They don't need a building and pest inspection. That is not a recommendation, by the way. That is not a recommendation. We're not saying don't do these things, but where someone has made that, it can sometimes entice the owner to say, oh, that's a little bit less money, but it's a sure thing. I've got surety that I'm going to get my money in 30, 45, 60 days, whatever settlement is, and I haven't got to be concerned about the bank valuing it or them finding out about the rot in the underneath the stumps in the property, or the subfloor is damp, or there might be things that they're going, oh, geez, if I haven't got to do a building pest, I might get away with this.
There's also the communication you have with agents. And so people quite often, they put their offer in and then they're like, they don't actually engage with the agent to get any feedback on it. And so if that's important to the owner, or if somebody has actually said, they may not even be a cash buyer, they might be somebody who's already already sold their property, and they have a lot of equity, and so they don't have to worry about, the finance. They're not borrowing 90% of what they're paying or whatever. So their circumstances could be different without necessarily being cash buyer. But it can also be in the conversation that you have with the agent, because the agent might just feel more confident with another buyer because they've been more transparent. And, we teach you what conversations to have with agents, what to give away and what not to give away. And sometimes people don't give away anything. And then the agent's looking at them and says, well, I don't know anything about them, so I can't vouch for them.
Yeah.
And if the vendor does have to sell and has that sort of tight turnaround, then they're going to go with the agent's recommendation. And so that can be sometimes why somebody sells for less money.
Can I just also say there, you may possibly have just pissed the agent off in the process, being a big turd that they didn't want to deal with, and yours got put to the side. Might have been presented to the owner. They have a legal obligation, but agents are human beings, and if you treat them terribly, or you rip the property to shreds, or you degrade it in some way, and that gets back to the owner. I've seen owners at auctions, not an auction that I was part of, but I've seen a situation where an owner during an auction refused to sell a property to a particular buyer who was actually a solicitor, because he was so rude during the auction process and attempted to frustrate the auction process so much that they ended up saying it hadn't passed reserve, so they had the option to pull the property. And they simply said, we're pulling the property and we will negotiate with those three people, but we will not negotiate with that person. They actually pulled the property from the auction process because of the way that person was interacting with the auctioneer and the agent on auction day.
And that's something
has an impact.
You can do if you've got enough buyers, for sure. But, I've seen in private treaty negotiations where the owners has refused to sell to certain buyers. And so that's when it's too late to get advice. You've already annoyed the people. You have a stink about you if you have been doing that. It doesn't matter. Actually, I had a client some years ago, it's a long, long, long time ago when I first started as a buyer's agent, and he was quite difficult to wrangle, let me tell you. He was a difficult cat. And he, I was in the middle of negotiations and he got impatient. And he jumped the gun and he jumped over me, he jumped over the sales agent, and he went and knocked on the owner's door.
Oh, no.
And he delivered a low
By the way, that's a big no. Everybody,
do not do that.
That is a big no.
Do not do that. He delivered a low offer, insulted the owner, and then he realised what he'd done when the owner basically almost spat in his face and just told him to get nicked, right? And he's like, oops, I think maybe I have really just done a really stupid thing. So then he comes back. He sends the sales agent a huge bunch of flowers as an apology. He sends the vendor a huge bunch of flowers as an apology. Send me one, the bastard. Anyway,
I'm sitting there going, look what you've just done to my relationship
my
with
reputation,
this agent.
my relationships. The flowers did the trick, though. He actually ended up buying the property, and so I was able to reopen negotiations because of the flowers. But honestly, I felt like punching him in the teeth, and it ended up buying the property. But that's rare, and that's only because he's the one that actually apologised for himself. Beside all that, it's very, very possible to get so far, stick your neck out so far that you have basically put a target on your own forehead, and it's like, no, will not deal with you. That is too late to get advice.
It's true. So for people who actually are thinking about using a buyer's agent, starting a negotiation and shooting yourself in the foot and then going to a professional negotiator like a buyer's agent and thinking that they can rescue it for you is too late.
Yep.
If you started that conversation, it is way too late to bring someone in who can actually do it effectively for you.
Way too late. And I'll use the example or analogy of bidding at auction, right? This is like when we go through the exercise with a client, we explain to them the whole auction process. We explain to them a whole setup before they set their reserve. And when I say their reserve, their buying reserve, right? And explain to them, don't keep money in your pocket and tell us about it during the auction, because then we can't bid strategically. Like you've blown our cover. You've told everybody in the whole auction room that you're over your limit, and now you're running the show. And so it's a bit like that. It's a bit like you've exhausted all your own your own efforts, your own resources, and then you go, now I'm going to give it to the professional, but I'm actually tying both their hands together and their feet together, and I'm actually putting them underwater, and I'm giving them a bag of rocks to hold on as well. And we're expecting them to be able to float to the top because I basically ruined things. So that's
too late for advice.
Too late for advice. Too late.
So, and we move on to the next one, which is I get this at I've had this at barbecues. I signed a contract and paid $1,000 deposit on a piece of land. Do you think it's a good property?
No.
Too late.
I read something very similar to this in a forum this morning. I made an offer of $400,000 on this property in some place, and it's got $500 a week rent. Isn't that wonderful? Do you think this is a good, but it's low socioeconomics, do you think it's a good suburb to buy in? And it's always exactly this question. It's like, you've already made the offer.
Why are you asking after? Do your due diligence beforehand.
It's exactly right.
Get your information, get your strategy right, do your area research. We're not even talking about due diligence on the property because it's not sounding like it's a good one, frankly. But no judgment here, ever. Is it, Veronica?
Just lots of judgment, but it's educated judgment here. Educated.
It's trying to stop you from making these silly mistakes. But it is too late. So at that point, if you go to a seminar where people are talking about, it might be a rent vesta or something, or a house and land package or something like that, where you go to a seminar where it sounds really, really good and you feel really caught up in the euphoria of how easy it is compared to how hard it has been for you actually out there slogging it away on your every weekend trying to find something, and you find this, oh my goodness, this is the answer. It's straightforward, it's simple,
easy.
It's new, it's shiny, it's easy. It's harder in the long term because if it's easy to buy now, it's harder to sell down the track, and capital growth matters. We know this.
And so the reason why these questions, such as I've made an offer but I haven't committed, but is it a good area, or I've signed a contract to pay $1,000 deposit, is it a good property? The reason this question is too late, even though they haven't actually committed themselves, is because there's a behavioural bias that means I think it's called the continuity bias. And basically it means that once you start on a pathway, you're more likely to continue on that pathway. And you've already started on the pathway by signing something and paying a deposit, or by making an offer. So this is a problem with just being a little bit cavalier as to whether it's all right, I can back out of it. Even though you can back out of it.
And you actually want confirmation, not.
Yes.
not someone to tell you that you've done the wrong thing.
Your brain is wanting you to continue on that path, even if it's the wrong thing. And that's why it's too late for advice, because by that time, confirmation bias is already arguing with good advice.
Good way of putting it. Now, this is a common one in Brisbane. We just found that our property floods and settlement is next week. Can I get out of the contract?
Well, the answer is,
it's too late for advice.
Settlement's next week, definitely too late, right?
If it's unconditional and you didn't have a clause in there that allowed you to terminate for adverse findings, then it is too late. Now, in Queensland, there are specific clauses that allow you to terminate if you find matters that directly affect the property that you could not have found in the normal course. So flooding is not one of those things, because that information is freely available on the Brisbane City Council website. You know, that is part of the due diligence you should be doing before you even go and look at the property, let alone make an offer on it. So
yes, good
too
point.
late for advice.
Yep. You're going to suck that one up and see it. You know, we do laugh, but we're also in pain when we laugh at this sort of thing. We laugh at with incredulity. I can't even say incredulity, with the stupidity of this stuff, and it's just the naivety, because people just don't realize how serious this is, you know. And they also, when it starts dawning on them, that's when they think, oh, now I need advice, but it's too late, and this is just far too important for that. Here's another one. I signed a contract with a 5-day cooling off period, but my lawyer says there's some clauses in there I should not agree to, and the vendor won't change them. What should I do? Now, this is a sort of a bit of a New South Walesy type question, because you get a 5-day cooling off period because you can't do conditional offers in New South Wales. So the agent will often say to you, it's all right, don't worry about it. You've got 5 days, and then you can get your building pest inspection done and get the contract reviewed and do all those things, get your finance sorted in those 5 days. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the vendor doesn't have to agree to anything you want changed. And you have a penalty of 0.25% of the agreed purchase price that you have to pay if you decide that you're going to exercise your cooling off rights. And if you do that, and once again, that's back to that continuity bias, you're already on the path. You're less likely to. It's not to say people don't get out on the cooling off.
Perhaps some sunk costs as well can influence you.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people tend to continue down the path, even though the path isn't necessarily the best path for them. But in this particular instance, the clauses, you know, if you're lucky, the vendor will agree to change them, but they are under no obligation to. You're no longer negotiating because you've signed.
And I think this comes back to knowing what to do at the right time in the right order. This is someone who didn't do something in the right order, and they've got themselves to a point where the solicitor's reviewing the contract after they've signed it.
Yeah, and it's quite common.
Wrong time.
Why solicitors hate Mondays.
Wrong time. And of course, again, we teach you in the course, when is the right time to actually be negotiating these things. So go on to the next one. I signed a contract, and now the strata report shows that the roof is leaking and they have almost no funds for repairs. Can I get out of it? That's a toughie.
It depends.
You do a lot more. Now, it's different state by state. Let's kind of, well, actually, we're not here to answer this. We're just here to say.
No, we're here to say that there are some times when it's too late, right? It's too late if you did not have, if you're in a state where you can put you can sign a contract conditionally, and if
it's a condition that is,
and if it's a condition
of the agreed conditions
specific to that problem or to the strata report, or if it's specific and is covered by that specific condition, which would have been written by your conveyancer or lawyer before you signed it, right? So if you've got that, potentially you can get out of it. Go to your lawyer or conveyancer. So that's one thing. Secondly, if you're within the 5-day cooling off period, and it doesn't matter why you want to cool off, you can cool off for any reason you like, but you've got to pay the penalty. So that's your 0.25%. And in most jurisdictions, there's a penalty if you're using a cooling off period. Yes, you can get out of it if it's within the cooling off period. But if you've signed a contract unconditionally, or you've gone beyond the conditional period, or you bought it at auction and you hadn't done a strata report, or you'd done the strata report and you hadn't bothered reading it. You just thought, oh, I've done it, so that's all I need to worry about. Or you gave it to someone else to read and they didn't read it, and then you looked at it in a bit more detail. It's too late. And you might get whacked with a big special levy that you could have known was coming. You could have known, but you didn't. And I get asked this a lot.
No opportunity to renegotiate for the amount, and it could be one of the reasons the seller was selling. If there's a special levy coming out for $20,000 or $30,000, that may be why the seller was quick to get out of there and took your low offer.
And I am astounded. I talk to sales agents a lot, and I am astounded still at the amount of people, even with all the publicity around building defects and all the negativity around apartments. I'm astounded at the amount of people that will turn up to an auction and bid on an apartment without having read a strata report. It absolutely blows my mind. And it's because they're not in this space. They don't realise how common special levies are or building defects can be, and they're just blissfully unaware, and then they get themselves in this pickle. So this is not uncommon. It sounds ridiculous, but it's not uncommon. So we're here to protect you from these situations where it's too late to ask for advice. All right, another one.
I missed out on one house and the agent showed me another off-market on the Saturday afternoon. I made an offer that they accepted, but now I realise it's too high. How can I backtrack? Have you had this before, Veronica?
I have had this. I have had this because particularly at auction, right? It's so emotive, right? And quite often people they haven't properly gone through a process of setting their limit before auction, and sometimes they will, if they haven't and they pulled out too quickly, they will regret not continuing to bid. So people worry about overpaying, but there's an equal thing they should worry about, which is underbidding. And when they
holding themselves back.
Yeah, and this is why we teach you in the course. We got a free mini course on how to price a property, but also there's a whole process that goes into working out what you're prepared to pay for a property. But nearly everybody that goes to auction does not do that process. And I know that because I used to be an auction sales agent, and I've been a buyer's agent for as long as I've been. Right?
And you watch them at auction, Veronica, and it's particularly prevalent with couples where you can see that they've kind of gotten close to the amount that they agreed over a glass of wine and a beer the night before. Let's go to here. And they sort of get there and they start shuffling their feet, and then they're looking up to the sky, and then one of them goes, yeah, go again. And then another one goes, no, don't. And then, yeah, go again. And
I love watching it.
It's just amazing watching the body language when people have surpassed their limit.
Yeah, because they don't talk to each other until they have. And then it's dead giveaway. It's like all of a sudden it's like now they're talking. All right, so this bid, $200,000 in bids, and I'm thinking, what a great bidder. You wouldn't know where they're at, blah, blah, blah. It's really good. Bang, you know where they're at because they suddenly turned to their partner and they got these looks on their face like, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? Anyway, the amount of people I've spoken to after auctions, I'm fascinated by this. I wrote a book about auctions, remember? I'm fascinated. The amount of people that say, I should have bid more. I should have bid more, right?
And that's just as bad as someone who goes, well, is it just as bad? It can be just as bad, particularly in a rapidly rising market, as if you bid over your limit and you've actually bought the property.
Well, that's pretty painful.
That is financially painful.
Yeah.
But if you have, and agents find it really frustrating, I would have paid that. That's probably another question that we should have had on there. I would have paid that if I'd known that's what it was going to sell for. That is one that I get quite a lot in private treaty. Now, I know we've gone off the auction topic now, but that is definitely one where, particularly in a multiple offer, and they think, well, the agent's trying to push me up. Yeah, the agent is trying to push you up. That's their job. But have you worked out what the property is worth and blah, 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 everything we talk about in the course.
Yeah.
And then they walk away and go, if I'd known that's what it would go for, I would have paid that. But you had the opportunity to pay it and you chose not to.
This is letting the process of negotiation get in the way, isn't it? And so,
it is.
But in this particular situation, what I've come across many, many times is that agents, they're ambulance chasers. Great. And when I've seen agents from other offices, like different real estate agencies at auction, watching the underbidders and pounce on underbidders with off-market properties and then drag them out there in the afternoon.
They are so emotionally heightened and so prepared to move forward. And if they are shown something that is remotely close and around their price range,
and they feel like they're giving exclusive access, it's something special for them. Scarcity, there's scarcity bias. There's also the loss aversion because they're already feeling that pain of loss. They want to get rid of that immediate pain from having just lost that auction. It's brilliant for a sales
opportunity to do the due diligence and to do the pricing research. And that's the thing about being put in this high pressure situation.
And
at least, hopefully, at the auction, they've done their due diligence in the lead up. But when you're put into something and you're emotionally heightened, your ability to actually, step back and say, oh, hang on, I need to think this through, because often the tactic of the agent is to say, we've got this really short opportunity.
Exactly.
You really need to do something now.
And so they fall into the trap, right? So earlier I was saying people dig the hole for themselves. This when they fall into the hole. And then they're like, on the Monday, because then they can't buy the thing that day. Well, sometimes they can actually.
Yeah,
they can actually buy
the contract.
But if they hadn't, if they say, the contract, I send the contract to the molar on the Monday or whatever, and that's the point where they start thinking, if I paid too much, and is it really worth it? All the doubt comes into their mind. The problem is when you go to negotiate, you've already sort of blown it. You know what I mean? You've kept nothing to yourself. Like you're basically very, very difficult to backtrack when you've already made an offer.
And it's late for advice.
It's a bit late for advice. So there you go. These are a whole bunch of examples. They are drawn from questions that have pretty much been thrown at me recently or thrown at Meighan. And we're just like, please do not be these people.
Yeah, we want to share them so that you aren't the one in the position going, after the fact, what do I do? Like, we want you to think about these things and actually have a strategy in place and have all the steps in the right order before you get to these situations. And that puts you in a much better position to buy a good quality asset and pay the right price.
Exactly right. Now, not find yourself in the middle of a negotiation where you really are out of depth and you've already blown it. You've blown your chances of really getting it at the right price.
Yeah, it could be the right one.
Good. All right. Quick note. You might think that we cover everything that you need to know in these podcasts, but a word of warning, we don't. We're just scratching the surface. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
Our first home buyer guide course only costs $990 and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations. Trust me, you'll overpay by a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing. And these are just some of the examples of where people have overpaid not by thousands, but possibly tens or hundreds of thousands and ended up with the wrong property, and that's even worse.
Absolutely. We're here to help you avoid that.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.